At first light, the market smells of oranges and damp rope. Alima ties a tarpaulin to a bent nail and smooths the edges the way she smooths her children's hair. Barra's Harbor is a charcoal line in the east. Cyclone warnings have been on the radio for 2 days. A chorus of verbs. Prepare, move, secure. She cannot move the stall she pays for by the week. She can only lower it. She stacks soap, 3 bars to a packet, and slides her ledger under a tin box. When it rains, coins go green. When it floods, coins are a joke. Wind rubs its knuckles along the corrugated huts upstream. Men in bright vests nail plywood across clinic windows. The clinic is new, rebuilt after the last time. The old infirmary was rebuilt after the time before that. An engineer hired with money that arrived a year too late pointed at the flood line the last time and said, "Higher, build higher." The money ran out exactly where the concrete should have been thicker. The engineer moved on. Building stood. 1,000 miles away in a calmer room, a reinsurer in Zurich clicks a mouse and watches a map flower with red circles. He measures risk the way bakers measure flour. Grams, not handfuls. Mozambique's numbers are ugly. Insurance penetration. A footnote. Vast exposures in low ground. Losses to come. Heavy. He thinks of the phrase he learned his first month. The protection gap. Which a polite phrase for a brutal truth. The distance between what is lost and what is paid back. In rich countries, 3, 4 of every $10 come back. In places like this, sometimes 1 in 10, sometimes none. He swivels to a second screen with a different ocean. The Caribbean is a long necklace of tiny budgets. He remembers a case study with neat conclusions. A small island state, a hurricane, a parametric policy through a regional pool. The trigger met, money in days. It read like fiction a government that could pay teachers on time after a catastrophe. He copies a phrase from the study to a slide for a meeting. Speed is not a luxury, it is survival. Barra's Harbor deepens to the color of unripe eggplant. The first squall crosses the beach like an eraser. Lima looks up, not at the sky, but at the ceiling of her stall. The nails are honest. They show what they will do when the wind learns a new verb. South, a river begins to decide it would rather be a lake. Upstream, people have walked with firewood on their heads, smiling at the camera of a man in a plastic poncho who says his name in network. "Uncle," he asks, "are you insured?" The old man stares as if pitched an unfamiliar fruit. He points at his goats. He has insurance that can bleat. In Port-au-Prince the day after, in a year with a different calendar of ruin, a mason stands in front of a wall that fell and rubs dust between his fingers like a farmer testing a handful of soil. He bought a lottery ticket last week but cannot imagine buying a policy for his house. The house never had a title. The land was his brother-in-law's cousin's. Insurance requires proof. Disasters do too, at the claims office. He lost his in the collapse with the school books. In Tacloban, a seamstress named Marielle keeps a laminated card that says microinsurance in a plastic envelope with her baptism certificate and the photocopy of a passport she used to work a season in Dubai. After Haiyan, the day the wind walked through doors, a woman from her cooperative stood on a chair in the gymnasium and shouted names into the humid air. Marielle's was on the list. She signed a form with a cheap pen that didn't want to write on damp paper. 5 days later, she received enough to buy a new second-hand machine. Not the one she wanted, but one with a straight stitch and a reliable motor. It was not everything. It was a start. It was a sentence you can finish. Beira City Hall is a yellow building with green shutters and a flag like a stern smile. Inside, a young man in a white shirt with the sleeves very clean because he does not do manual things, scrolls his phone for a message he has been told to expect. An alert about a line of credit. A donor's condition, a fund with a long English name. Economic loss is a number. Fiscal space is an absence. He calls the Minister of Works, who answers on the third ring with a voice that is trying to be older than it is. Any coverage? The minister asks. For roads? No, for the port. Some. For clinics. Only the roofer's warranties? The minister laughs without wanting to. The line drops and returns with wind in it. He looks at a map with red pen lines where the embankments have failed before. Memory taps on his shoulder. The last pledge conference. the speeches like holiday decorations, the checks that arrived very late and very small, the ones that were large and arrived with knots in their bows. On the Indian subcontinent, in a village with a wall of cyclones behind it, a school on stilts opens its doors before the storm and swallows 2,000 people in 2 hours. Early warning messages arrived with the fragrance of rice because women read them aloud in kitchens. The floor is chalked with boxes that count space. In a pocket not much bigger than a city block in Dhaka, a team in blue vests call out numbers, latitudes, longitudes, meters. The pressure drops. Someone mutters that the name of the storm sounds like a child's song. He hopes it will behave like one. It will not. The rain arrives in lines. The first are polite. The next show their teeth. Lima watches her ledger float against the tin box and decides to laugh. It is a good laugh, loud enough to remind the sky that it is not the only thing that makes noise. She reaches for the box, slips, and both hands slam flat on the plank as the first tongue of brown water comes around her feet and tastes her ankles as if formally introduced. In a capital far inland, a finance minister in a gray suit studies a premium invoice for a policy called parametric. It will not pay for each broken roof. It will pay because a thing happened in the way the contract says is a thing. He has 4 deputies and 3 options. He can buy it and be accused of spending on wind instead of wheat, or not buy it and be accused of failing to prepare when the wind comes, or buy a smaller one and be accused of both. He turns the page. He sees the word trigger and thinks of pistols and rains. The pressure drops again. Radios crackle. Somewhere in the mess of institutions and voices in good faith, a man says into a microphone, "We will help." And a woman in rubber sandals under a sky with new ideas turns to her neighbor and asks the question that is the currency of all disasters: how? Her neighbor shrugs. In places where the premium is a rumor and the policy a wish, the answer is always the same. You begin with your hands. The wind picks the market's tarpaulins like teeth. The sea, with a patience that seems like grace until it is not, makes its way up the gutters and over them. By the time the first sheet metal screams, by the time the water forgets it is supposed to stop at the curb, the question of coverage has left the room and the reality of loss has taken its chair. Alima hooks her fingers through the tin box handle and braces her feet against wood that will soon float. A gust, a sound like a train with lungs. The roof lifts just enough to make everyone in the aisle look up. A wave tips a crate of oranges onto the street like a bowl carelessly cleaned.
Right.
The ledger opens in the water as if to a blank page. The page is wide and brown and refuses ink. The market floor becomes a riverbed. Baskets swing away from hands that were sure of them. Men who speak in jokes muscle refrigerators onto their sides and lose them anyway. A motorbike stutters and falls 3 times, silencing with each dunk like a drowning idea. Alima feels the weight of a metal box become, first, a pain in her wrist, then a conspiracy. She lets it go because fingers matter more than money, now. The box remembers gravity and drops out of her world into the waters. Upstream concrete believes in itself, and then doesn't. A culvert coughs up a tree. The bridge at the edge of town hesitates like a line of people at a door too small, and then makes a new plan that involves downstream. The sky bends low and presses the city to its knee. The hospital generator has opinions about humidity and expresses them. Nurses move by hand what machines cannot. Water whispers to wires. Someone shouts to cut the main and someone else asks how. A screwdriver leaps out of a pocket and into a drain. A lesson in infrastructure appears, uninvited. In a hallway, redundant systems require funding, and funding requires memory, and memory is exactly what disaster takes first. In the weeks after the Haiti earthquake years ago, people built camps with tarps scavenged and bought and given and stolen, whole neighborhoods made of blue. Insurance adjusters did not walk those aisles. There were none to send. The state itself had not insured its schools or ministry buildings. The money that arrived as charity in politics and debt. Claims exist in an economy of contract. Without a policy, your claim is a story. Stories take longer to turn into roofing nails. Chile, by contrast, shook just as hard, and taller buildings found their sways like ships finding their rhythm. Insurance penetration, there was not a rumor. People paid premiums the way they pay for water. The day after, Suits with clipboards stood at cracked facades, wrote numbers, took photographs, told people when money would come. It did, sometimes too slowly, sometimes with argument, but it did. Debts were tallied, checks were written. Life grimly resumed. Mozambique, in this hour, is closer to Port-au-Prince than to Santiago. The ledger floats away and takes a family's ability to argue with a loan officer with it. The children's school uniform shirts will be washed tonight in a basin, if a basin can be found. The stove is wet. Charcoal refuses to cooperate. A sack of maize waits 3 blocks away on a high shelf that is not as high as yesterday. At a community center in Tacloban, after a different wind and a different year, a long table with a green cloth becomes a claims desk. Card MRI and other microinsurance ferry stamp pads and carbon paper. The old tools that work when the lights don't. People bring the fragments of their lives that have value in an office. Photographs taken with phones whose screens are cracked, neighbors ready to swear, a pastor who will testify that this woman did live in this barangay and owned one sewing machine with a pedal. Small payout. $100, $200, $300 move through a chain of hands as fast as dignity does and as quietly. It is not charity. It is a contract honored. In a minibus rattling west from Beira, a woman who will be a claims assessor when claims exist for her to assess looks out at the palm trees bowed like old men. She works for an insurer that sells motor policies and a little health. Catastrophe is not their business model. She carries a notebook and a pen. Her boss said to see what is broken and write it down. He used the word exposure, and she wrote it in careful letters as if any of this could be made to behave on a page. The water reaches the knees of the statue outside the city hall, and then its hips. The young man in the clean shirt lifts the bottom drawers of a file cabinet, and then realizes the stupid of it. Realizes weight behaves differently on days like these. He curses the file cabinet and himself. He pulls the cabinet down. It lands with a sound like a door slamming on a quiet argument. The finance minister in the inland capital watches the rain erase highways on a dashboard built by consultants who wore shirts the color of spring a month ago when they were in this room. Bars that were green become pale, then gray. Radio words arrive and slide. His phone buzzes with a text from a colleague at the central bank. "If you buy that parametric thing, will it pay you today?" He types, "Only if the gauge says what the contract says." He does not send it. He types yes, within days if triggers are met. He sends that one. He does not type that the last time a drought policy failed was because the index was right and the people were wrong green on the map while the plants in their fields died under a million small mistakes, a thing the industry calls basis risk and the farmer calls theft. In Pakistan's Sindh province, in a summer that would become an argument about justice, water never intended to visit city squares takes tea there. The Indus climbs stairs it had no business knowing. Early on, meteorologists sent bulletins with new words like unprecedented. Warnings were not in short supply. But the insurance kept in wheat fields, there's the kind you plant and can't move. Policies are rare. The money that will rebuild will be a negotiation with the world. Grants if you can find them, loans if you can't, taxes later, inflation as policy. At the office of a regional risk pool in the Caribbean, phones ring faster than voices can answer. The modelers sit, shoulders forward, verifying that the wind blew hard enough for long enough where it needed to, for the contract's trigger to be satisfied. It is a cold sentence between warm minds. Wind speed at x4y hours within z. If yes, a payment that buys tarps, fuel, salaries, food, the quiet dignity of a government that functions. No, then a press release with condolences. "We cannot pay sympathy," an old underwriter once said, and nobody has forgiven the sentence since. The water in Beira decides to stay. It pools in places like patience, pulls down plaster, and lets the rooms behind it breathe their moldy breath. Alima sits on a doorway that is now a bench and counts what is not there. Youngest asks if the oranges learn to swim. She tells him yes, they have little arms. He nods, as if this is wisdom. Marielle in Tacloban, years earlier, sat on a low wall outside the gym and watched her new tour sewing machine come off a truck wrapped in dusty plastic. She cried in a way that was all throat and no sound. Around her, people with envelopes did math out loud. Roof sheets times price minus cousins help equals possible. Some had nothing but a church meal and the cave of a roof to wait in. Others had that envelope, and with it the right to choose. Outside a ministry in Maputo, A line forms when someone opens the window and says there will be registration for help. Help is a word with as many definitions as the number of people who say it. A woman at the end of the line remembers the last registration. The money arrived 6 months later. She had to sign her name 4 times. Her name is long. The pen worked half the time. She is here anyway. She saw the minister on television saying the government would do what it could. She believes in verbs until they break. On a freight deck, a continent away, pallets of bottled water make their way into columns of trucks. The donors' logos are crisp. Cameras find them. It is not wrong. It is not enough. A parametric payout would look like nothing. It would be men with keys opening warehouses they already rented last week and putting diesel into vehicles they already maintained, because maintenance is the opposite of charity. It would be a teacher being paid on payday. It would be a clinic keeping its lights because the bill was paid. The flood pulls back a little to breathe. The rain doesn't. A rumor walks the market. The dam is going to open. Someone else says the dam has no more to give. It is all open already. The word compensation appears, unmoored, in sentences. 8. It floats with the same lack of friction as a banana leaf. The city hall's generator coughs back to life. Once, twice, as if considering the future. The minister stares at the premium invoice and makes a mark next to a number with a pen that does not like wet paper. It leaves a bruise of ink and then gives up. He puts the paper down. He looks at the ceiling. He makes the decision that will not save him, but might save someone he will never meet. He says yes. Bear leans its ear to hear whether anyone else did. When you scatter a life on a floor, the first thing you pick up tells you who you are. Alima chooses the photograph of a boy in a school shirt, his cowlick refusing to obey the gel. She presses it to her thigh to dry, her skirt turning the picture into something that will last if you let it. Her neighbor across the aisle picks up spoons because hunger arrives before memory in her house. A man farther down searches for a notebook with names of customers who owe him and finds only other people's cardboard. Days later, the vocabulary blooms. Relief, assessment, appeal. Men from the municipality walk with clipboards and apologize with their eyebrows. A visiting delegation arrives with press shirts and a converter for their chargers. They take pictures of the broken clinic and nod grave nods. The engineer who said hire is no longer in town, but his voice is, in the way people tell a story about how the money ran out where the concrete should have been thicker. Bills arrive. They're the only thing that moves on time after a disaster. The clinic supplier wants to be paid. The paymaster for the teachers looks at a spreadsheet and a bank account with numbers like a cough. The donor money will come. It always does, if only to prove that the world is watching. But donors are not claims officers. They do not exist to pay what was promised in a contract. They exist to be kind, and kindness has its own calendar. In what used to be a kitchen in Port-au-Prince, a man spreads a tarp with the gentleness of a parent. He has been told help is coming. He has also been told to wait. He has been told both things since the first day. He tries to be equal to the task. He fails when the rain insists. He gets up in the night to push the water off the tarp with a broom, a gesture repeated 1,000 times in 1,000 cities, where roofs are not roofs anymore, but ideas. Chile's rebuild moves with a rudeness that is strength. Insurance money works like a river that has been taught not to wander. It is directed. It pays policyholders because the contract says it will. It pays contractors because invoices match estimates. Fraud slinks in at the corners, as it always does, and is batted away with systems. People complain about adjusters and their precise inspections. People also sleep inside again within months. In Tacolbin, Marielle pays her first new rent late, but pays it. She sews hem after hem in a rhythm that becomes a lullaby when she curls around her children at the end of the day. The microinsurance program has a problem called scale. You can't buy a roof with a payout designed to buy a chicken in school fees, but roofs get built anyway. When money arrives while hope is still useful, she is not waiting for a grant she cannot predict. She is spending a small claim she earned by paying small premiums she could see. In the desert edges of the Sahel, a farmer named Amadou stares at the sky. The rains have been mean. ARC paid his government once, when the index said drought with its sterile numbers. And the government used that money to buy sacks with grain that said relief in block letters, and to run a program with a name that sounded like a committee. He received ration cards and a bag with a seal. He was grateful. Then another year his millet failed in a way that fell between the instruments, and the payout did not come. Basis risk is a spreadsheet word. He heard only that the radio said there was no emergency, and his belly insisted there was. In Mexico City after 2017, the government's disaster fund had a different relationship to calamity. Its catastrophe bond triggered for the big quake in the south. Money arrived because seismographs said yes. Public buildings could be repaired because a ministry had thought months and years before in numbers that felt imagined at the time. The policy did not see the tears on the street, but it respected its own language. Respect is underrated when you are sleeping in a car with your wife and your mother-in-law because their histories do not overlap well in small spaces. Back in Beira, the finance minister signs the parametric premium. A messenger drives the paper to a building with an elevator that smells like oil and good luck. An email pings in a server cultishly positioned above a desk with a cactus. The policy is active. The storm that filled the city like a bowl is already walking inland, dragging its rain behind its knees.
Ow.
The river gauges send numbers to satellites. Satellites send numbers to models. Models decide whether the contract's thresholds have been crossed. The minister chews the rubber cap of a pen and pretends not to care. He cares as if it were his own kitchen. A week later, a notice arrives. Event notified. It is not a poem. It is better. It says that the conditions have been met and that within 10 business days a sum will be wired. 10 days on field time can be the difference between a cholera outbreak and a shrug. 10 days is the width of a small miracle. But not everyone lives inside a ministry. On the market street, Alima has not heard of the policy. She hears a rumor that people with contracts on their buildings received 5 calls in a truck. She hears another that men with clipboards are coming to count. She hears the loudest rumor of all that nobody will come. She decides to stop listening and start moving. She drags wet wood out to the sun and props it like ribs. She finds the ledger where the flood teased it and opens it on her knee. The pages are waves. She writes her customers' names on top of the blur. People are not data. It can be found under mud. A claims assessor on a motorbike arrives finally, performing the theater of officialdom in a place that still believes in paper. She asks about receipts. There are none. She asks about serial numbers for machines that sank. There were none to start. She takes photographs that show the world a floor that isn't there. She blinks hard when she turns away, decides to count losses as if counting makes them less. In Sind, a man named Fazil watches his cattle pick their way through water into a lower field because the higher ones are crowded with other families' herds. He sold a ring to buy the calf that will be his daughter's dowry. The calf coughs and splays its legs and then rights itself the way a calf does. Fazil heard on the radio that the government is studying insurance for floods, and he pictured men studying as cows bellowed into empty rooms. He hears the word coalition. He hears the word reconstruction. He hears that the world owes them, and he believes it for 5 minutes, and then looks down at his feet and knows he cannot ask the water to argue about debt. A bank in Beira opens its doors and finds its counters wearing a skin of silt. The manager makes coffee with grit in it and meets the girl from the insurer. They share a look that will be a friendship later. She asks how to get money to people without accounts. He asks how to open accounts without papers to prove names. He suggests bringing tablets to the market, using the shade of a tree for a branch. She nods. They test a SIM card. The signal comes and goes like forgiveness. In the evening, the donors' conference streams live on a television with a corner of dead pixels. A man at a podium says "Build Back Better" in a language that belongs to meetings. Alima counts. She has 10 packets of soap left, and a stack of plates chipped at the edge she will sell at a discount to a woman who knows her and knows the secret. Things still hold at the chip. The minister gets an email with the subject line, "Funds dispersed." He closes his eyes and thinks of a truck arriving at a bridge that did not fall. Wages paid so men will show up with shovels tomorrow and the day after. Of chlorine tablets distributed without the theater of ribbon cuttings. He allows the smallest luxury any public servant can know, the sense that an answer arrived before the media did. Insurance at its best buys time. For a seamstress, it buys days to sew before the rent man hardens his face. For a state, it buys the week between flood and fever. For a farmer, it buys fodder, not affection. The way money moves matters as much as the amount. A woman in a line for assistance hears her name, shouted by someone in a vest. She steps forward, cautious, as if the syllables might shatter. The vest hands her an envelope, a cash grant from a program stitched together by agencies that have learned a little to move faster. She isn't sure if it is a payout, a gift, a loan, a promise. She opens it. Notes look the same regardless of adjective. She does not cry. She tucks the money under her blouse and walks it home inside her heartbeat. Night brings mosquitoes thick as gossip. Generators chatter, coughing blue smoke. Somewhere a boy splashes in what his mother told him not to touch. Somewhere a claims officer adjusts a clause in a future policy that will ruin a future argument. Alima lies with her children under a net with one hole that she keeps forgetting to mend and sees in the dark the face of a man explaining premiums in a church hall with bad fans, and hears herself ask, "But if the sky does not fall, what becomes of my money?" She hears him say, "It becomes the roof of your neighbor." She had laughed then, and she is not laughing now. She knows something she did not know last week. Uncertainty has a price. She has paid it already. The question is whether anyone will pay her back. The ledger dries, the mold stays. Weeks tilt into months. Budgets are rewritten as elegies. The clinic restocks gauze one box at a time. The rumor of cholera stays a rumor. The students return to a classroom where the water line on the wall is a ruler you can't use for math. A painter comes with a bucket the color of quiet and covers it. The line remains. Paint is a form of denial. Fools the eye, not the memory. At a cabinet meeting under a ceiling fan that knocks its chain against itself, the finance minister slides a sheet across to the health minister. The first parametric payout is gone salaries. Fuel repairs to a road that held a convoy of chlorine and hope. The health minister nods, exhausted, grateful, suspicious of gratitude. And next time, he asks. We renew, the finance minister says, and he mouths the words like an oath and a question. The premium has to come from a budget that already cuts itself into thin slices. He will have to explain to Parliament why a line item for a thing that didn't happen last year must still be paid this year. He will be accused of spending on ghosts. In a sand-floored hall in Beira, a meeting stretches into a memory. We need a savings group, a woman says. We need a fund we can see, a man adds. The microfinance officer with a short tie nods. Index insurance for crops is discussed as if it were a cousin who might come live with them. Someone asks about basis risk. The room learns new words the way a body learns to carry weight it didn't choose. Beyond the river, an NGO pilot introduces forecast-based financing cash that moves before a flood, because the forecast said likely with enough combinations of letters to be believed. The last time, people mocked a little. Money before rain felt like bad luck. But families who moved grain, raised sockets, bought plastic drums, and tied them high, returned to clap at the training. They speak like engineers about inches and hours, and the forecaster in Dhaka would be proud if he heard the vocabulary walking. At a reinsurance conference in a chilled ballroom, a panelist from a climate research institute says a phrase that makes insurance men stir like an anthill. Secondary perils. Floods, fires, convective storms, things we used to count as sideshows are becoming the main act. A slide shows a line creeping up like a thief. Another slide shows red dots where insurers have left zip codes to their fate. Retreat is what the brochures call it. Abandonment feels closer to the truth when you live in a valley where premiums triple and your roof is not made of choices. The Philippines fusses over microinsurance benchmarks with the bureaucratic affection of a parent measuring height on a doorframe. Tens of millions covered by small policies that pay small amounts quickly. The regulator is boring on purpose. Boring saves lives. In Kenya, a herd insurance program pays a pastoralist via mobile money when the satellite says grass is gone. He buys fodder before the calf's ribs show. Sometimes the satellite is wrong. Sometimes the calf dies anyway. But last year, he says, it lived, and that is enough to make him pay again. In Sindh, the talk of insurance becomes talk of roads and of drains that remember which way to take water. The men at the ministry discuss sovereign risk pools and are interrupted by a power cut. Sovereign risk pools do not fix wires. They do not replant mangroves. They are for the week after. Everyone at the table knows it. Everyone also knows that when the week after comes, the microphones appear and the words, "Where is the money?" fry the air. At the small island state's finance office, the CCRIF renewal arrives with friendly phrases and unfriendly math. No. The premium is a number with commas. The Minister of Education needs those commas for textbooks. The Minister of Tourism needs them for marketing. The Minister of Works needs them to fix a road that fell into a cliff. The Minister of Finance needs them to sleep at night in August. Cannot afford not to, he says, meaning the premium. Cannot afford to, they say, meaning everything else. He remembers the last hurricane. The payout came before the first foreign camera. He signs he decides to lose an argument in April to win a night in October. Developers gather on a subcontinent coast to talk about building back further from the shore. A developer raises his hand and says, "We will lose sea view." The planner wants to say, "You nearly lost the sea." He writes instead on a flip chart, "Setback line." He draws it thick and straight. The line will bend around the rich. That is how lines behave. He knows it, hates it, and keeps drawing. In a village outside Kathmandu, masons lift bricks into a pattern that looks like superstition and is, in fact, physics. The government offered grants for quake-resistant construction if you built by the book. The book arrived late. The masons learned early. Insurance would have paid in the month after. Grants paid in the third year. Rebuilding a wall is a job. Rebuilding trust is a generation. A woman holds the plan in her lap and frowns at a number. It is not the math that troubles her. It is the memory of sleeping under tin the first winter after. She writes her son's name on the lintel when the wall rises. Lintel will hold. At an economic ministry in a coastal African capital, a slide titled "Risk Layering" tries to be a story. You keep small, frequent losses in savings and contingency funds. You buy insurance for medium blow storms and floods that come every few years. You turn to the big world, the lenders and donors, when the once-in-a-century wave arrives. The minister understands. Also understands he has savings for today's fuel, not tomorrow's storm. He chooses to be angry later. In Zurich, the reinsurer who watched maps at dawn reads a report with numbers that sharpen global economic losses from natural catastrophes in a recent year, north of 200 billion. Insured, about half. In poor countries, 9 of every $10 uninsured. The phrase protection gap is still polite. The report includes an image of a child on a roof, closes it, and looks out the window at a city where rain behaves. He wonders what role he plays other than calculation. He forwards a note to a team about a pilot in Mozambique. He adds 3 words, "Make it human." Beira returns to itself in patches. One street opens like a throat clearing. Another sulks in brown water for a fortnight, and then spits out cars with mold beards. The agent from the insurer, she has a name. Estrella puts a folding table under an acacia and prints posters that say, "Register here." She is not selling policies yet. She is taking names for a program that will come if a donor decides it will. She smiles all day until her cheeks hurt. People sit and sign and ask about premiums. She tells the truth. It will be less than a chicken, more than a bag of rice. She uses those as currencies because all currencies are relational. People nod. A woman says, "Will it pay before or after?" Estrella points at the sky. "Before if we can.
After
if we must." Another season rolls towards Sind on a wind that carries dust and dread. Forecasts tremble with weird heat. The minister asks his forecasters if unprecedented can be used twice in a decade before the word becomes useless. He signs a letter to a multilateral lender for a line of credit that will fill the hours between press conference and procurement. He signs a paper for social protection that will turn into text messages the weak water loves roads more than riverbeds. He signs too many things. He sleeps badly. He wakes at 3, with a number in his head that he doesn't know means anything. A boy in Tacloban goes to school with a backpack and a story about his mother's new machine. He believes he is heading toward a future where winds are stories told by his elders. In Beira, Alima lists 10 names of women with stalls who would buy a policy if it existed, and if the premium could be paid in 3 parts, because months are not equal in her life.
Oh.
She writes the names on the dry page that once was a wave and draws boxes next to them that she intends to fill. The city's sirens do their monthly test, a low keen that makes the old men look up as if a friend has called their name. The finance minister stands at his office window with a paper coffee cup and listens. In the silence after, he hears rain begin in a shy kind of way. He has paid a premium he will have to defend on television. The radar to the east has a hook in it. The phones on desks a continent away will soon vibrate with thresholds. On a street where the water took 3 refrigerators and a radio, a child laughs at a puddle and jumps in it. His mother lets him. She cannot choose the rain. She can choose to allow joy in a quantity she can afford. She pulls him back by the wrist when the puddle decides to join the gutter, and the gutter remembers last month's ambition. Forecasts sharpen. System organizes in the channel and looks at the coast like it remembers a promise. Strela fastens her hair back and calls the bank manager. The minister turns a page. Alima slides the ledger into a plastic bag and ties the knot tight, the way you tie a hammock knot that must not slip. The sky, arrogant with its own memory, lowers itself again. It starts with a tone, not from the sky, but from pockets. Phones sing in unison across Bara, a blast no app has ever made before. The message is short and does not whisper. Move to safe shelter now, bring water, lift belongings. This time the voice arrives with a second hand following it. Money. The forecast-based program that made everyone shuffle in chairs last month, flipped to go in the river. Reached the number agreed in a room with fans. Accounts that were opened under an acacia received small amounts in the afternoon. Enough to hire 2 boys with a cart. Enough to buy 4 sheets of plastic that do not tear in wind. Enough to rent a room on a second floor for a week if you squeeze. Estrella runs between stalls, shouting the name she memorized, then pointing to her poster where someone added in pen. Cash is here. She does not promise roofs. She promises hours. People spend the money the way you spend time when it suddenly appears urgently, badly, well, all at once. A woman buys rope before rope disappears. A man buys wood and 3 strong friends. Alima pays her cousin with a truck, who has never been paid to carry anything for her before. Weeps in a way that makes him cover his face with his baseball cap. Says thank you like a child and drives. The minister at his window hears the siren again, not a test this time. He checks his email and sees what he needed to see. The parametric contract for river flood has triggered. The wire will arrive within days, not weeks. He calls the warehouse that holds the chlorine and the tarps. They will open tonight because the keys have not been lost this year to bureaucracy. He calls the payroll office. Teachers will be paid on Friday, even if the water is still in the courtyard. The road crew is already idling near the first bottleneck, because idling costs less than rebuilding a washed approach. He remembers last year's kind donation of bottled water arriving after the river went back into its bed. He prefers his own trucks to other people's cameras. In Sind that same week, the forecast goes purple, then something new. The Social Protection Ministry, having learned from the last humiliation, presses send on anticipatory cash to the poorest ID holders in the floodplain. Texts are not roofs, but they are sacks of flour, jerry cans, a bus fare to an uncle's town that sits on high ground. The amount is not generous. Generosity rests on better tax systems and a world less tilted. It is, however, on time. In the Caribbean, a small island state watches a storm, eye its shoulder, and turns on its sirens without apology. The CCRIF team, at their rows of screens, see the wind field carve its signature over the trigger box. They say yes before the story is over. The finance minister on the island sleeps between knocks that the wind makes on the shutters and a buzzing phone that says the first tranche will land in the morning. He nods in the dark. He knows what debt smells like. This is not it. This is prepaid oxygen. The storm in Bara arrives without poetry. Wind that doesn't argue. Rain with weight. The market evacuated in an orderliness people are proud of without saying so, takes its beating in front of a smaller audience. Things break. That is what storms hired themselves out to do, but fewer bodies stand in front of things. A clinic loses to windows, not power. A bridge loses its temper, not its bones. The convoy gets through because money paid the men to wait at the tricky curve all afternoon. Alima sits on a stair inside the school on stilts with her children and her ledger and a plastic bag and a bottle of water she didn't have to beg for. She is not comfortable. This time she is not humiliated. She bought the truck. She paid the cousins. She is within the circle of those who acted, not those who were acted upon. Outside, wind arranges the trees into a story they will tell later about how the tallest spent the most. A day later, when the sky decides to be done, and the river decides to be reasonable, the water retreats quickly because last month men with pay in their pockets and spades in their hands deepened the drains as if their dinner depended on it. It did. The road crew slaps down a temporary surface on a stretch the previous flood taught them would go. They knew where to stand because they remembered, and because the payout let them buy the tar that had been a promise last time. A health worker holds up a strip of paper and smiles. Chlorine is cheap when you buy it last week. In Tacloban, Marielle stitches and listens to the radio narrate disaster in another language. Her microinsurance renewal is due next month. She will pay it. The amount is real. The peace it buys is more real. She thinks of her neighbor who refused and then borrowed from a man whose interest is a form of cruelty when roofs leak. She doesn't argue. She just lifts the presser foot and feeds the cloth. In Sind, the flood arrives slower, then slower still. The anticipatory cash did not move the river. It moved the people. Donors will still come, and they should, and their money will still matter when the second wave of sores and fevers emerges. But the photos that go around the world show more animals on higher islands of Earth, and fewer men with their chins just above water wondering who wrote a sky like this. In the reinsurer's office, the map shows one red circle notate paid, another pending, a third threshold not met. He thinks of Amadou. He thinks of basis risk like a ghost that sits at the table even on good nights. He opens a file with a pilot for flood microinsurance that has payouts tiered like stairs and triggers based on community gauges, not just satellites. He writes the sentence he can defend. We must design for wrongness. He presses send. A union of market women in Beira meets under the acacia and votes by a show of hands to pay a small premium as a group every month that gives them preamble money before storms whenever the gauge upstream starts to misbehave.
Nice.
They elect Estrella treasurer because she has a laugh you can trust and a bag with zippers that work. They write the rules in a notebook and wrap the notebook in plastic because notebooks drown easily and rules take longer to replace than tarps. In Parliament, the Minister of Finance stands at a mic that squeals and takes questions delivered with a theater that has its own season. Why pay for catastrophes that may not happen? Someone asks. He says the line he practiced, the truth that feels like a cliché, until your roof buckles, 'cause not paying is more expensive. Someone else asks why the payout didn't cover every broken thing. Says, because insurance is not a fairy godmother, it is a bridge. You still build the road. He watches a few heads nod, who don't belong to his party. He takes the small win like a bowl of soup after hunger. A mother in Sind spends the last of her anticipatory cash on a bus ticket and a bag of rice that will be spared mud. Eating in a room where the floor is dry is not policy. It is the outcome policy hopes for. A farmer in Kenya receives a ping. The satellite eyes said drought and paid him. Goes to a feed store and buys hay that smells like stored sun. A grandmother in Manila reads a renewal notice that uses the word micro and laughs at the word and pays anyway. Who is winning? The question belongs to headlines and meetings where men wear blue suits that look good on camera. The answer, if you walk the market and the ministries and the homes with tin roofs, is not a scoreboard.
Ow.
Early warning wins when it walks with money. A siren that leads to a closed warehouse is a lullaby in the wrong language. Insurance wins when it is designed with the lives it intends to cover, when basis risk is not a shrug, but a design problem solved with local gauges and layered triggers. Governments win when they pre-agree to be brave, to spend on the season that may not come, to wire salaries before cameras arrive, to buy time on behalf of the tired. Communities win when premiums are small enough to share and large enough to matter. When claims are processed beside trees with names, when the dignity of contract replaces the theater of charity, the world wins when solidarity is not only after, but before. When catastrophe bonds and risk pools and contingency funds sit on shelves like tools, not trophies. And surprise? Surprise is not a competitor. It is a teacher with cruel methods. It instructs by taking, it should not be invited, it should be expected. It should be paid a retainer in the form of premiums, drills, drains, and raised sockets, so that when it arrives, its lesson is shorter. Alima opens her ledger and writes in a neat hand, under the old tide mark, premium due, then draws a box. She fills it with a tick that looks like a little wing. In the school on stilts, a child practices a siren sound with his mouth and makes his sister laugh until she forgets the last dark night. In a ministry with paint still drying over the floodline, A civil servant writes parametric renewal with less fear in his wrist than last year. There are losses still that no document can return. Names not called at dinner. Houses that will always smell faintly of river. But more often, the camera arrives in his board not because nothing happened, but because something happened in time. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that change the world.